Hello, 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 and welcome into Tunnel Vision, a show presented to you by USCFootball.com. I'm your host, Jack Smith, joined in studio by Ryan Abraham and Connor Morrissette, and we are ready to preview one of the biggest games of the USC football season as the Trojans head to Ann Arbor this weekend for their Big Ten opener against number 18, Michigan. As always, if you're just joining us, you can leave any comments or thoughts that you have in the comment section wherever you're watching, be it Facebook or YouTube. We can put those on the screen, or you can call into the show, 5124-TUNNEL. We'll make sure to get to those calls and questions at the end. But, guys, this is kind of the one that people circled going into the season as maybe the turning point, maybe the biggest matchup in USC season, and also just the first one that they get to play moving into this new conference in the Big Ten. I know there's maybe a little bit of a letdown over the last couple of weeks with the way Michigan has played, but what's on your minds heading into this game?
Yeah, this is a historic matchup. And welcome to everyone. If you're live on YouTube or Facebook, thanks for joining us. If you listen to the podcast, that's great. Jack is back doing a great job. We got Connor here. But this is a very historic matchup. USC and Michigan have played 10 times. USC's won 6 of those. Most of them have been in the Rose Bowl. I think they were the Big House back in the 50s at some time. But knowing that USC was coming into the Big Ten, they were the blue blood program. Oregon's certainly been a hotter team, in the last decade or so, but USC's the traditional team, the one that's been to the Rose Bowl, won more Rose Bowls than anyone else has been to. And having the first game in the conference be at Michigan is huge. And I think all of us talking into this, we were like, okay, well, USC's going to try to rebuild this defense and turn things around. You got to replace Caleb Williams. This was a write-off game. You're like, yeah, you got to go to the Big House. This would be cool. It'll be a cool trip, but you'll lose that one. But maybe you can win enough games and still go to the playoff or something. And it's completely changed. And now USC is almost a touchdown favorite on the road. And I was talking to someone that works at USC, and they're kind of bummed. They're like, before, they were sort of like this was a gravy game, and now it's if you don't win this game, USC fans aren't feeling very good about stuff because you felt like you should win this one coming in. So it's changed a lot. But the basis of it being a historic matchup, the very first USC Big Ten game ever, I don't know if you could pick a better spot than playing Michigan in the Big House.
I think if you're a USC fan, it's changed for the way better, of course. So I don't
know
who you were talking to. They should be excited. 6-point favorite.
I guess the expectations are higher now, yeah.
No, for sure, but that's good. Don't you want high expectations? Dan Weber wrote a great column today just talking all about how USC used to be in these games every week with Pete Carroll, and it was just kind of like you got used to Kirk Herbstreit being at practice, and it was one of the biggest programs in town, and people got used to that, and now it's nice that USC's back. Only 2-0, but I still think, even if you lose this game, the season going forward is still in a really, really good position, and the team is just better than I think anyone anticipated. I know some fans on the board, 16-0, are winning the national championship, but to me, I was surprised to see how quickly USC, on offense, the growing pains that I anticipated, they haven't really been there too much. And then defensively, the turnaround, it's night and day from last season. The fact that it's happened this fast is awesome. So even if USC goes into a Michigan game where they're favored and they disappoint a little bit, I still think you look at that schedule and the season, it still should really be a success, barring injuries. The coaching staff is way better. The roster looks better than people anticipated. Defensively, this team is a lot better than I thought. Miller Moss looks great. So it's not still gravy. USC, the expectations are high. I get what you're saying, Ryan, but either way, I'm still feeling really good. And Dan's column, I read it today, and it's like he's right. Even if you drop this game, there's still going to be high expectations the rest of the year. USC's in a great spot.
Yeah.
I think going into this game, people are a little bit more down on Michigan than they were before the season.
Oh, definitely.
That's obviously true. But this is still the defending national champions, and you can definitely pick up some brownie points across the country with a win like this, because obviously Texas got that win in the Big House a couple of weeks ago. But this is still the defending national champions. They haven't lost 2 games in a season since 2021. I know it's maybe a down year for Michigan, at least from what we've seen so far. But it's still a huge opportunity, as all the players and coaches kind of mentioned to us this week. They didn't frame it as this big challenge. It was an opportunity for them to go out and get a win.
Yeah, and I think when we looked at the schedule when it first came out, there was a lot of positives to it. Of course, there's going to be some road trips. I know. I'm just looking at my expenses for our travel. It's like, wow, there's a lot of trips. It's like Notre Dame, but 4 times a year. It's a little different. But it was a lot more manageable than I think it could have been. Knowing that the 2 best rosters, at least on paper, USC avoided. They didn't have any upper Midwest travel in November kind of stuff. You look at UCLA's travel. I mean, they go to LSU, they go to Hawaii. Like they're going all over the place. USC's a little more contained. You got the Maryland trip, Minnesota earlier in the season, and the Michigan one was sort of one like, man, that's tough. But the better teams outside of Michigan in the conference, you're playing them at home, and so I think it's set up pretty well. And then knowing that Michigan, we didn't know how much better USC would be, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They're better than maybe most of us thought. We didn't know how big of a step back Michigan would take, and they have too. I mean, Washington even they haven't looked very good. They lose to Washington State. Like that game doesn't look as daunting. Playing two teams that played for the national championship, both have taken a pretty big step back. So the schedule overall looks really manageable. And at 9-3, you felt like that would be a pretty good season, and you could potentially make the playoff. And now it looks even potentially better than that. But this one, to me, in the beginning of the season, I said this wasn't an important game because you could lose this one and it wouldn't matter as far as you could still make the playoff. You can win those other games like beating Nebraska and like Minnesota on the road would be more important because there's the one games you could lose like LSU and Michigan, and they're expected. Well, you already beat LSU. Now you're kind of expected to beat Michigan. So this, to me, has shifted. I didn't think this was as important of a game as it is now because you get this win, and now you're making noise in the Big Ten for the first year because everyone thought it was going to be Oregon, the new team making noise. It can beat USC and Oregon now if you go in and win this game.
I still think it's a huge game because even if USC was, say, 1-1 right now, you beat Michigan, I think the perception changes. And nationally, people are getting up to speed with what USC's done. I was watching Danny Cannell earlier. He picked USC against the spread. Bruce Feldman picked USC against the spread on The Athletic. We've seen when USC's won some big games in the past, it's like, well, I'm still a little skeptical. I want to see them do it against a better team on the road or something like that. And people have made those arguments. And now with D'Anton Lynn, with Lincoln Riley in year 3, people nationally are up to speed, I think, with USC. And now you beat Michigan, then what else do you have to do? Just continue to do what you're doing, and you're going to be in a really good spot. So I think, to me, this is kind of like so early in the year. You don't win any trophies for going 3-0, but you win this game. Nationally, there's nothing anyone else can say to kind of knock down USC. If you go on the road and you beat Michigan, they're limited, of course, but that's a massive win, even in their current state where we don't know if their quarterback can throw the ball. Defensively, it's a good unit. They have a new coordinator. It's different, but they still have some NFL players on that side of the ball. You go in and you beat Michigan, all of a sudden, this great start, it becomes an exceptional start, and I think from there, everything kind of explodes.
Yeah, to have 2 helmet game wins, like 2, logos that you beat 2 of them, and you shut out a crappy team. So, that you couldn't start much better than that. And you can beat LSU by a point, you can beat Michigan by a point. It doesn't really matter, even though the spread's going to be 5.5 or 6. Just getting that win at Michigan is all that's going to matter.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's impossible to discount at all about this game is the fact that you do have to go to Michigan, play in the Big House, because what were the things that were said when USC joined the Big Ten? It's like, well, now you got to go play these Midwestern teams. You have to go to their stadiums that hold 100,000 people, and you have to play that tough brand of football. USC can kind of check off all of those boxes with this game against Michigan. Maybe you're not going to face the most high-flying offense that the Trojans will see all year, but you get to kind of, I guess, quell those stereotypes a little bit that USC can't play with a team like that, can't play in an environment like that. And maybe after the LSU game where people were discounting it a little bit, I think the fact that this is on the road is, A, the biggest challenge for USC, but also the biggest thing that'll just be impossible to discount if they can get a win.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel it's weird to feel as good as I do. The more I've talked about this game, I've done, go check out USCfootball.com. I did a Know Your Foe piece with Zach Shaw from the Michigan Insider, does a really great job. He did a good breakdown of USC as the opposition, but he did a 5 questions thing with me and just the realism of what's going on. I mean, just as a high-level view, Michigan's offensive line lost a bunch of guys, but they felt like it was going to be potential strength of this team. It hasn't really been that way. I mean, you got 2 running backs that have been really, pretty effective in the last game against Arkansas State, but they're not a really great, rush defense. Defensively, they just haven't played to the level, even though there's some NFL talent and potential 3 first-round draft picks. They're not really deep on the defensive line. You got a bunch of guys that they haven't generated the kind of pressure that you would like, and we saw Texas sort of be able to pick them apart. And when you look at what works and what doesn't, and having a one-dimensional offense with Alex Orji, the quarterback, who's thrown one pass in his career beyond 5 yards at the line of scrimmage. Like everything, if you wrote down, you're like, okay, D'Anton Lynn's really good at stuffing like one-dimensional offenses. And, Miller Moss, who can, like, if you're not going to get a lot of pressure on him, he has time to find a receiver. Guess what he's doing? He's throwing to everybody and people on the bench he's completing passes to. He spreads it around. You can't really shut anybody down. It just seems like everything is lining up. Like if USC does what they do, like college teams change every day. It's just different week to week. They're a bunch of college kids. No offense, Jack, but you're doing it. We all change, right? It's tough. You go out and play pickup basketball. Someday you stink. It just happens. But if USC just plays like what in the range of what they normally do, they're like normal range, everything seems to set up really well. Like they can do the stuff to shut Michigan down, to score points, and win the game fairly handily. So that's what's probably a little scary. It's like, man, it's just the more you look at it, the more it seems like this is USC's to lose.
Well, it's all about what kind of lift Alex Orji can provide for Michigan, in my opinion. And, Jack, we talked on instant analysis yesterday how this game, it reminds you a little bit of when Utah hosted Oregon last season, and Oregon was just better and beat the brakes off them. Is this a situation where USC is just the better team and they're able to maybe not beat the brakes off of Michigan, but beat Michigan, cover the spread, maybe it's a 2-score win? I also, and it's a little different, but just conceptually, like the Arizona State game last year. Arizona State not even in the same class as Michigan. That's not what I'm trying to say. But the week before, when USC played Arizona State, they looked awful. They lost to Fresno State. I think they had like 8 turnovers. Their quarterback got hurt. It was just a terrible, terrible game. And then the spread was massive the following week, and USC didn't cover it. Arizona State was a little bit better. They got their quarterback back. And I think the perception from the previous game really affected Arizona State. Obviously, they looked terrible. And then, for whatever reason, USC wasn't ready to go. Arizona State made them pay, and they cover the spread. So, offensively, Michigan has not looked good this year. And against Arkansas State, Warren throwing the 3 picks, that was terrible. And I wonder, with this spread, like 6 points, USC's been awesome. But it's all about Alex Orji. If he can come in, not turn the ball over, and they do okay on offense, I just wonder, with that defense at Michigan, like, right now, is this spread, is it thinking more about Davis Warren, even though the odds makers know that he isn't playing, but like, do they have him as the quarterback when this came out, or what does Vegas expect from Alex Orji? I don't think anyone really knows that, and until we kind of see it for a few series, that's why I have such a hard time picking this game against the spread. Like, is it going to be decent? Is it going to be terrible? Is the coaching staff not as good as we thought for Michigan? Are they way in over their heads, which they could be? There are just so many unknowns, especially with their offense, that it's kind of like, I think USC's going to win. I'm pretty confident in that. But by how many points, that will be determined by what Michigan does on offense. We just don't know what it's going to look like.
I love the way you say terrible, by the way. Just terrible, just fun. The way you say it's like a little Massachusetts accent. But yeah.
I think the interesting part is Michigan's been so bad that almost, as if you're a USC fan, you're a little nervous that they're going to feel desperate. And a team that won the national championship last year, clearly well coached, clearly they're able to scheme things up, and maybe they have something up their sleeve with Alex Orji, and maybe they're so desperate to avoid a second loss that even if USC is the better team, like Michigan can still find a way to win. Also the fact that it is on the road in maybe the most hostile environment USC will have played in the last, I don't even know how many years. I think it's more hostile than going to Salt Lake City or Oregon State a couple of years ago or Autzen Stadium last year. But I think that's kind of the main concern is everywhere you look on paper, USC should win this game probably. Is the better team on offense. You could argue they've been the better defense this year with the depth concerns for Michigan, some of the tackling concerns that Michigan's had this year. But there's that third element of it's football. Some teams are desperate. The way seasons go, the way games go, I feel like that is what Michigan is relying on. And if you were a Michigan fan trying to make the argument about why Michigan's going to win the game, it's an argument like that, not a pure X's and O's football kind of argument.
No, I agree. And I think with what Connor's saying too, it's the Alex Orji factor is what is going to probably determine this game. When you go with Davis Warren, and it wasn't a really well-liked decision, but he apparently played better the last couple weeks of camp, and you're like, he's going to take care of the ball better. He's going to, be the game manager and not put us in bad positions. You want it's a defensive run the ball kind of mentality. Well, that guy's turned the ball over. He had 2 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. And then Orji's basically every time he's come in for the last 3 years, it's been he runs the ball. And it's like you have nothing on him throwing the ball. It's like this is the forward, like Newt Rockne called it the forward pass. Like this is like what the basics of. We've never seen the dude throw the ball. Like so, what is going on? So, I think for Michigan to have success, the run game's gonna have to be successful like it was last week against a bad rush team. But we already saw Danton Lynn shut down an LSU team with NFL offensive tackles that wanted to run the ball, shut that down. Now, they had Garrett Nussmeier, who can sling it, and they had some success moving the ball and completing intermediate passes and stuff, picking up third and longs. USC, they're not, well, USC hasn't given up a third and long, but they've been able to move the chains. And I think you just don't have that. Now, maybe he finds a way. There's a way that Alex Orji finds some guys open, but you're going to have to complete some like 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8 type of passes. And it's everything we've seen is just like the only way he's throwing the ball is if everything's set up because it's been run, and not putting in a situation you're behind the chains. Danton Lynn's just been really good at making stops. I mean, a lot of the running success that Michigan had against Arkansas State was yards after contact, and USC's eliminated so much of that. They were bad at that, and we saw if a guy misses a tackle in years past, it's gone. Like no one else is there to get him. Like they're gang tackling, they're getting to the point of attack, and they're not missing that first tackle a lot. So it's just another one of those things that just I'm curious to see what happens, but it would have to be Alex Orji doing something we haven't seen him do and playing, like kind of out of his mind. And, maybe it was there. We just never saw it. They were saving it for this game. I have no idea, but it's something that we haven't seen that's going to have to happen. And I don't see Danton Lynn giving something like that up.
And they just don't have any receiver who you're like, okay, Alex Orji hasn't thrown the ball much. He can just throw it up to this guy, and this guy can make a play.
That's a very good point.
Tight end Colston Loveland is banged up, and even if he is going to play, he's not going to be 100%. I just Googled his name to see if there's an update, and the latest headline, Michigan desperate for Colston Loveland to be quick healer from injury. It just sounds like he's not going to play. He came back into that Arkansas State game after injuring his shoulder, made a catch, re-injured his shoulder, so it was like a double whammy for him. I don't know why you would try to force the issue to play him if there's really not any reason to right now. So he's their best guy, and he might not even play. So I think that's a big factor as well. And the Danton Lynn factor is so important. Like if they can only run the ball, Michigan, they really struggle to throw it. Their quarterback isn't a great thrower, doesn't have a lot of tape out there, only the 7 career throws. They don't have any All-American candidates at wide receiver, anyone even close. You know what they're going to do. Danton Lynn has proven how good of a coach he is. If he knows you're one-dimensional, that's why I struggle to be like, how can USC not win this game if they can only do one thing? And it's not, an exact science. Stuff is going to change. They will throw it a little bit. It just seems to me like Michigan only does one thing, and you can't do that to beat this USC team.
No. Just real quick, to remind everyone, we are taking live calls if you want. 5124-TUNNEL is the number. You can put it in there. I don't know if we have any calls yet, Jack. And if you have questions, if you're watching live on Facebook, I think we got a couple dozen people doing that. And then on YouTube, just put question in there, and Jack will be able to put up on the screen, and we can answer them for you. Sorry, Jack.
I was going to say, on a bad offensive day last year against Penn State, Michigan just committed and ran 32 straight run plays in the second half at one point and won the game. Mm-hmm. Are you at all concerned that could be something that Michigan lines up and says, hey, Alex Orji can't throw, 33 straight run plays. We're going to set the record.
Well, their defense was better last year, and they just gave Drew Aller hell. And I feel a lot more confident that Miller Moss would be able to execute, even if it was a better defense for Michigan. Like I just think the comparison is different because I feel better about Moss than I did about Aller last year, and the Michigan defense clearly isn't as good. So can you run it that much if you're Michigan and win? I guess in theory, yes, but I feel like, do you think USC can get to 21 points, maybe 20 with some field goals? Like, can Michigan get to 20 points? I feel like when you're going up against a Lincoln Riley offense, and they did well against LSU, they beat the brakes off of Utah State. It's only 2 games, but even in a hostile environment, they're going to get more than 14 or 17 points. I think they can get to that 20 mark. And my question is, can Michigan?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And I think if Michigan's running 33 times the way we've seen this team play defense, they're probably punting 6 times in that stretch. So that's not good. When they're running against Penn State, they're picking up 6 yards and then 4 and move the chains, and 5 and then 7 and move the chains. And I'm not sure you're going to be able to do that, especially without the threat of being able to throw the ball. Now, we've only seen Danton Lynn coach this group of USC guys in 2 games, but they've both been very encouraging. You have a week off. You hope that helps, but who knows? There wasn't the hangover effect we thought that could have happened for Utah State. They played really well there. You feel like they're just going to play well, and they're going to be able to handle business. So if Michigan's one-dimensional, I have a hard time, Jack, seeing them being able to just hand the ball off 33 times or have the quarterback run a little bit. I think Alex Orji will get some success on the ground. Bryson Barnes, who ran over USC last year, didn't do anything. It's the worst team he was on, but Utah State scored 21 against Utah. That has a good defense. I think that shutout, there's some legitimacy to that. There's legitimacy to what USC was able to do to LSU, and I feel like a one-dimensional Michigan squad, if they run all over USC, that's going to be a very surprising result for me.
I think one thing to look at is the way that Texas played Michigan, because Texas, I think, is obviously a better team than USC at the current moment. They're obviously ranked number 1 in the AP poll, and they might be the number 1 contender for the national championship. But the way that Texas looked at the game is knowing that Michigan had those stars on defense. You have Will Johnson at corner, and then Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham on the defensive line. All 3 of those guys are probably first-round picks, if not top half of the first round, top 10 kind of guys. And Steve Sarkisian, I thought, had a pretty good game plan going into that one, where he just didn't want to go at them when they were on the field, and they would go laterally and they'd get the ball in the hands of their playmakers. They tired out those defensive linemen so much that they tested the depth, which in the past for Michigan has been fine because they've had some of those guys that are first-round guys were backups, and they had first-round guys as starters. This year, it doesn't seem like Michigan has that kind of depth, and maybe that's a post-Jim Harbaugh thing. Maybe that's just didn't reload enough in a recruiting class or two. But Texas would go side to side when those guys were on the field, and then they'd eventually come off. They'd get tired because they were only used to playing 30-something snaps a game last year. This year, they're averaging about 50 snaps per game, and you get tired at that weight playing, especially when you're running from sideline to sideline. And when those guys were off the field, Sark went right down the field with the running backs, kind of hammering up the middle and testing that depth. I talked with Chris and Connor this week about it. When USC was playing Stanford last year, and everyone was so concerned about what David Bailey would do on the edge as a potential game wrecker, all they did was go sideline to sideline, tire him out, make him run from one side of the field to the other, and he did nothing against USC. So I guarantee you that Lincoln Riley has watched that game film from the Texas game. I'm sure he noticed what Sark did, and I would bet USC probably tries to do something similar, considering they have those playmakers that Michigan probably doesn't have. And I would assume that we'd see a lot of lateral runs, a lot of getting Miller Moss moving from one side to the other with a quick option to either run the ball or pass the ball to a Zachariah Branch or a Mekhi Lemon, tire those defensive linemen out. And a lot like Michigan has done over the last couple of years, when you notice that you kind of have the other team in a spot you want them and you notice that they're tired, that's when you start the kind of ground and pound game with the running backs. And I feel like that's kind of the recipe for USC in this one.
Isn't it funny that Mason Graham played 58 snaps against Texas, and last year Bear Alexander played all of those snaps in all of those games for USC, and now this year you look at the snap counts for USC against LSU, and it's a mixed bag with Gavin Meyer and Nate Clifton and Bear Alexander. There isn't that one guy playing all of those snaps. Didn't work for USC last year, and now Michigan, the team that won the national championship, they're relying so heavily on their guys in the middle. All offseason, we talked about how USC kept missing on these guys in the portal in the middle. They don't have the depth. They don't have the depth. They don't have the depth. And now they have better depth on the defensive line than Michigan does. It's just one of those crazy things that I don't think anyone was talking about. I know I didn't predict it. I was banging the drum about USC not having the requisite depth in the middle, and you look at the snap counts for Mason Graham against Texas, 58 snaps. You're right, Jack. That's way too many for a defensive tackle on a good team. And you look at them last year, they're way fewer. They were a better defense last year. USC, the reality might be that they might have better depth in the middle of their defensive line than Michigan does. And before the season started, to your point, Ryan, USC wasn't going to be favored by 6 points, of course, and they weren't going to have the better depth, and now they got both, I think.
Yeah, I think it's not as deep of a Michigan defensive line. And I think just in general, the way Jim Harbaugh left, sort of, Sherrod Moore does have some experience. He coached 6 games last year for Michigan. He beat Ohio State, but this was Harbaugh's team. They weren't really sure he was going to leave. They didn't bring in a transfer quarterback. So I think the transition is a little tougher on him for sure. And you have 3 potential first rounders on the defensive side, but some of the depth isn't there. Their linebacker play hasn't been very good. And like what Jack was saying about Texas moving around, I think another similarity, you watch what USC did to LSU. I think there were some concerns that USC wasn't good at running the ball in like running situations, like second and short, third and short. When that receiver caught an 8 or 9 yard pass, you're like, oh man, they better throw it again, because when they line up the run, they just weren't very successful. But they got the run going after opening things up with a lot of intermediate routes, and Miller Moss could pick up chunks of 8 yards and 12 yards and things like that. And then the delayed handoff to Woody Marks, and they were breaking it. And I think it kind of goes along the lines with what Texas was doing to Michigan. USC is not going to just run up the middle on the first 2 downs and then throw the ball on 3rd and 6. Like, they're going to make those guys run around and chase them. They're probably completing some passes, and then when you're like, oh crap, we got to defend this, is when they can try to pop Woody Marks. So it's just another one of those things that, like, you write it down on paper, like, this seems like it's going to work out well for USC. And I said this on the podcast. It's just USC they are the button-down program. Everything is in order. Like, you open up the folder and everything's in its right place. Like I was saying, every I is dotted and T's are crossed. Now, that could all go to hell when you go to the big house. But right now, USC is doing all those things. The little things are right. The players are having a good time. They know what they're supposed to do. They have a ton of confidence, and that can go a long way. So, yeah, just on paper, I didn't want to come into this being like picking USC to cover a spread, but I'm probably going to. So, it's crazy.
It's funny how the more you talk about it, it's like, how could this possibly go wrong outside of the offensive line for USC having some mistakes and Miller Moss throwing interceptions? Like, I guess if Michigan scores an early touchdown, you'll be fearful, but can you score a lot of points exclusively running the ball? I think the strength of the USC defense is that secondary. I don't see that as a good matchup for Michigan in any way, shape, or form. It's just tough to imagine them winning this game and even covering the spread a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, shit can go sideways, right?
Yeah,
like,
course,
it can happen. Like, there's a tip ball interception here. I mean, there's stuff that can spiral, and it's just like, man, like, but you feel like, well, if we play that 9 more times, it's probably not going to go that way. So it certainly could. But just if it's sort of like a normal game and just normal things happen, I think USC's normal is going to be better than Michigan's normal, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Another point to think about, too, is obviously Michigan lost Jim Harbaugh, and that's a big loss in terms of just overall building the program. But they had the #1 defense in college football last year, and Harbaugh took Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator, who runs almost the exact same scheme as Danton Lynn because they learned it at the same time together at the NFL level. And Sharon Moore brought in Wink Martindale. He's been an NFL defensive coordinator. He has cut his teeth even more than guys like Lynn or Minter in the NFL. Similar scheme, but it's a complete philosophical change for Michigan on the defensive side of the ball because the last couple of years with Jesse Minter, they'd get pressure, but they never blitzed. They didn't blitz at all. Now, Wink Martindale, because he's so used to the NFL where you need to blitz sometimes to get pressure, he's blitzing them almost half of the plays, nearly 50%. And that's just so different for all these kids that have been in the program for a while. And maybe that'll work against certain teams in the Big Ten where the passing game is a little bit clunky, and so you're able to get home on some of these blitzes. But Miller Moss is getting the ball out in 2.1 seconds. He's the 3rd quickest time to trigger quarterback in all of college football, that it just feels like the two schemes kind of butt heads a little bit, like what Wink Martindale wants to do philosophically, what he's used to doing in the NFL and in the first couple of games at Michigan, probably is something he can't do against USC and Miller Moss. And so one of the questions I've seen raised this week that I think is a good one is he going to be unselfish, not blitz because it's not the right thing to do in the situation, or is Wink Martindale going to stick to kind of what he's used to doing and just hope that it works?
And then on the flip side, their offensive coordinator, Kirk Campbell, he was the quarterback's coach before he was named offensive coordinator. It's hard to feel good about him with their quarterback situation. That looks totally botched. So to your point, Jack, new head coach, but 2 new coordinators. And with Wink Martindale, I don't know. I'm not in his brain. I don't know what strategy he'll do, and I'm not going to pretend to make an educated guess. I hope for their sake they probably blitz a little less because I feel like against Lincoln Riley he can scheme around that. But like I'm looking at their offensive coordinator, and I don't really feel a lot of confidence with him if I'm a Michigan fan because he was in charge of the quarterbacks the past couple of years. Their big hole on the roster, the big question, what's their quarterback situation going to be? Warren wins the job. He's terrible. Now it's Alex Orji. Like, I feel like this guy's had one job this offseason. He kind of screwed that up. And
the offensive line isn't playing as well. And Sharon Moore, the head coach, that was his job. He was the offensive line coach. So I think the transition, we've seen the Jed Fish transition in Washington. It's going to take some time. You have to replace the whole roster. I mean, Michigan's kind of doing that too, but they had more pieces left over. And the fact that Moore was there and actually coached some of the games. But it's a whole different story, I think, when you're running the program. So I think we're just seeing more chinks in the armor than what maybe people thought going into this Michigan game. And, some of the Michigan fans you're talking to is like they were feeling a step back would have been 10-2, 9-3. And now it's like, well, 7-5, it's like, is that more 8-4 kind of thing? And it's just really, it's such an interesting matchup and just everything you look at. Like, okay, this seems like this is going to go in USC's favor. But it's, you just never know what's going to happen in one of these. But seeing the way Michigan is sort of like, I think they'll get back, but to me, this looks like a kind of rough transition year going from Harbaugh to this new regime. And it's going to be growing pains. And for USC, you're probably in a good position to take advantage of a team that has growing pains. Because, Martindale comes in, if you got an NFL background, I'm always wary of making that transition. D'Anton Lynn did it seamlessly at UCLA. And sometimes just getting your message across to college players is the biggest hurdle, because you haven't had to do that in the NFL. You got them for meetings all you want. It's a full-time job as opposed to you're playing a college team. D'Anton Lynn shows him being able to do that. We haven't seen Michigan's defense sort of like really excel and play that. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll get there. They're 4 games in. You can do it. But USC's did from the beginning. Not enough sample size to say it's for sure this is the way it's just going to be. But it's like 2 guys that were coaching the NFL. One of the most impressive things about Lynn is the fact that he made that transition as seamlessly as he did and can teach college players to play the way he needs to play. They can play fast. They can play with confidence. And you just see the results in the field. USC's got, the same level of players they did last year, and they're playing astronomically better on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty clear USC, as of right now, is the better coach team, maybe has the better coaching staff. And the one point that we haven't brought up yet that might be the most important, that effect might be doubled coming off of a bye week. I mean, Michigan hasn't had a bye yet. They do get the game at home, so that's a good home field advantage for Michigan. But USC's had 2 weeks. I mean, Lincoln Riley's had 2 weeks. D'Anton Lynn's had 2 weeks to think about this matchup, whereas Michigan came into that Arkansas State game, I'm sure they were thinking, well, we could probably coast through this one and we'll feel pretty good, and then maybe we'll look ahead to USC a little bit. But they probably came out of the Arkansas State game with more questions than answers, and they really didn't get to enjoy a softer week that week. They didn't get to feel good about themselves after that week. And USC's now had 2 weeks where they've really only been able to focus on Michigan, which I feel like is a huge benefit that we haven't really discussed yet.
Yeah, and Michigan's played. This is their 4th home game. They haven't left home. USC
and they won't for a long time.
Yeah, USC played in Vegas, 1 home game at 8 p.m. In the Coliseum, and then now bye week and a road trip. So it's kind of a weird start too. Like, it could play to USC's advantage or maybe not. But I don't know, playing at home 4 weeks in a row is kind of crazy.
And not to be like an a-hole, but could Michigan just be bad?
They might be.
Could they just be in over their heads? Transitional year with a new staff. The cupboard was left dry. Is that the expression?
Cupboard, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
A cupboard.
Yeah, I don't know. they just don't have much, especially on the offensive side of the ball. The offensive line isn't as good as people thought. They got no skill position guys outside of the running backs. Their quarterback's a nightmare. Defensively, they don't have the depth people thought. Maybe this is the game where USC not only goes in there and wins, but it's like, okay, hey, you're bad.
Yeah.
We're going to beat you up.
Was it? So it's Anthony Edwards, right? The one.
Donovan Edwards.
Donovan Edwards, the running back, but he's been like the second guy to Mullings, who was like a former linebacker, but he's like he looked really good last week.
Yeah.
I think 150 something yards or whatever, but
he's the better running back.
And their defense is good. I'm not trying to say like it's a bad unit. If they didn't have those turnovers, they probably would have covered the spread against Arkansas State, and maybe they only score like 3 points, a couple touchdowns late. But it wasn't like Alex Orji came in, he led him to 1 touchdown, then I think they had 2, 3 and out. So it's not like he came in and changed everything. Their defense will be tough. Texas got on Michigan early, and they were never able to get back into the game. Is USC's offense able to do that? Maybe. I think Texas is probably a little bit better, but like, you'd make the quarterback change. This is kind of the last move you can make, and if this blows up in their face, we talked earlier, made the point like Alex Orji could give him a lift, and this could galvanize the locker room. Could go the other way too.
Yeah.
I think it's an evergreen statement, but it does feel like the way the first quarter goes is going to decide a lot in this game. I'm not sure Michigan can come back whatsoever. So it'll probably need to be Michigan gets out to an early lead and just runs the football and takes the entire clock and has the ball for 40 minutes and throws like 10 passes. That seems like the way Michigan wins. I don't think with Alex Orji they can come back down a touchdown or 10 points at any point in the game. So I think that probably makes the first quarter the most important quarter.
I totally see it the same way. If it's like 7-7 after the first quarter, game on. It's kind of how I felt with that LSU game where they marched down the field, LSU, that first drive, and if they get that first touchdown, it's like, okay, the defense looks a little bit better. LSU had to earn everything, but here we go. First drive, touchdown, same old USC. Whereas if Michigan's in trouble early, it's like, oh, same old Michigan. This is a Texas game all over again. You can make a statement in that first quarter, and I totally agree with you, Jack. Texas came on and jumped on them early. Game was never the same. And if USC can do that, they'll be in a great spot.
Yeah, I think USC's in a position you can play like by the numbers football. Like you don't have to do anything crazy. Just like do your thing and see how it goes. Like, oh, you move the chains, you got, score some points, and you play pretty solid defense against a one-dimensional team. Don't give short fields. Don't, give up anything in the special teams world. And you can probably do okay. I don't think that USC has to take a lot of risks, but we'll see. But you don't want to get blitzkrieged in the beginning where there's something like, oh, kickoff return fumble, then Michigan up 7-0 without doing anything.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of stuff you want to avoid to give any momentum. If you just sort of like grind out a drive or two and it's like, oh, it's 10-0. Yeah, they're not. That's going to be really tough to come back from. So if you can do that in the first quarter, like Jack said, like that's big.
Yeah, don't put an edge rusher on a running back on a wheel route or anything.
But
like
that's
that.
not going to happen this year. That's the. I don't think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, you would think. All right, we can get into some of the questions. We don't have a ton, so if you're watching on Facebook and YouTube and you haven't gotten a question of yours on the show yet this year, this is the time. We'll run through some of them here, but feel free to kind of get them in at the buzzer here. And if you want to call in, we'll do live calls at the end of the show. Nobody in the queue right now, so you can be the first person in there.
Yeah,
512-4-TUNNEL if you want to get any of your thoughts on. But a couple questions from Jasper, who's watching on YouTube. The first one, do you think that the Michigan offensive line is better than the LSU offensive line?
No.
I don't either.
No. I mean, they replaced a lot of guys from last year where LSU brought dudes back, and they had two tackles that now maybe LSU's line hasn't played up to what they thought, but talent-wise, LSU's a better offensive line.
Both have been disappointing overall, but I think you have to look at the talent on LSU's line, and like it's better for sure.
Yeah.
Michigan has been run blocking pretty well. It hasn't been as steep of a drop off run blocking wise, but the pass blocking has been much worse. You don't want to say that they're responsible for Davis Warren throwing 6 picks because that's on the quarterback, but it's been harder for Davis Warren than it was for J.J. McCarthy last year, who had a ton of time in the pocket to find the read that he wanted to throw to. But definitely I would say the LSU offensive line is better than Michigan's. I'll kind of spin that question, one of my own for you guys.
Ooh.
Do you think that the Michigan defensive line is better than the LSU offensive line? Because those were supposed to be, if you're looking at best O-line, best D-line in the country, USC, people thought was going to play both of them.
I think that the Michigan defensive line is better. They don't have the great depth that maybe we anticipated, but Mason Graham in the middle, who the heck was LSU's Mason Graham? Maybe the tank, forget his last name, they call him Tank, the big man in the middle. He got hurt after the USC game, and he didn't really do much. Mason Graham's a problem in there. The guy next to him's a problem. They have a good edge rusher, so I think they pose more problems than the LSU defensive line for sure at the top. Depth-wise, it's probably pretty similar, but Michigan for sure has more top-end talent.
Yeah, I forget that LSU had the good edge rusher that got some pressure. I think he got a sack against Miller Moss.
Savion Jones, I believe.
Was that it? No, I think it was.
Oh, you're talking about Harold Perkins?
Yeah, Perkins.
Yeah, he was playing middle linebacker. It's kind of it's like weird. You don't even know if he's really part of that defensive line. They got him all over these weird places.
Yeah, that's kind of a shame. He should have just been an edge rusher, I think, for my untrained eyes. But whatever,
Coming for Brian Kelly's job.
Yeah.
No punching the table. Another question that we've got from Jasper. Will USC try and run the ball up the A-gap or try and bounce it outside?
I think it's an outside. Yeah, I think a little both. But like I said earlier, I think you're going to set it up with passing. I think they're going to probably set up the run by throwing the ball and kind of keeping the linebackers, worried about what's happening, guys coming over the middle, whatever. And then they do that delayed handoff to Woody Marks so you could bounce it outside or go up the middle. So, yeah, I think you get those guys thinking about pass rush, and that's when I think USC can be effective. If USC can be effective short yardage situations running, which they could do against Utah State, but they didn't do well against LSU, I think that would be some really good progress too.
In theory, you'd think that they'd want to bounce it outside, but you got to do both. I don't think it's going to be exclusive one way or the other. That's just not how football works, but they do have those two good interior defensive linemen, so in theory, running right at them might not be a great success for USC, but you got to mix it up. You got to do both. I think Quentin Joyner, I keep coming back to him. I think he has a big, not a big game, but maybe a bigger workload than he did against LSU because he's so hard to tackle.
Yeah, the answer to this question is it leads itself into the answer to the question I've got for Andrew Murray's first question watching on YouTube. Do you expect to see Zachariah Branch on some jet sweeps to get the Michigan front seven sprinting horizontally to tire them out? I think yes. I think you're going to see a lot of that, a lot of the screen game, and maybe it's the screens to people you're not exactly expecting, because Michigan knows that USC is going to want to get the ball to Zachariah Branch like that. And you saw LSU almost jump a couple of screens to Zachariah Branch and Mekhi Lemon. So maybe it's to these other guys that USC didn't want to show those in the first couple of games because they want to bring it out against Michigan. But I would say, yeah, USC is going to run some jet sweeps, stuff like that. Try and run to the outside, specifically with the intent early on of tiring out Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham up the middle.
Yeah, and maybe you dump it off to Woody Marks. I like Mekhi Lemon in those situations. They missed one with him, right? I think they tried to throw that screen, and maybe it's one of the big receivers like Jacoby Lane or something, and they get you got a couple blockers out in front of him, and he can make some guys move. But I think all of that is just like, oh, you got to cover this side now, and you got to cover this side. I think it might be one of those situations where like you're playing tennis and you're like, I'm going to hit it to your backhand, I'm going to hit your forehand, I'm going to just make this person run back and forth a little bit. I'm not trying to like hit a winner. I'm just going to make you move. It could be a situation like that. You're just like, cover the whole field and let's see how you feel, and then we're going to try to run the ball on you, something like that.
I think you're going to see a lot of motion too, just to be as distracting as possible. And Lincoln Riley loves doing that, is moving a lot of people around to do something that's actually really simple and just try and get in a defense's head. If USC can execute that without false starting or using illegal formations or going in motion but moving towards the line of scrimmage, as long as they don't get flagged for stuff like that, I have a feeling that you're going to see probably a lot more motion in this game than you did in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I totally agree, and I just think that's the current wave of offense, too. The best offenses in the NFL, they're utilizing motion. Lincoln Riley's done it. Wink Martindale. I kind of feel like the coaching edge, the more I've dove into this matchup, like Lincoln Riley against Wink Martindale with Danton Lynn's background, working with some of the same people as Martindale, I feel like USC has a leg up there.
Andrew had one more question. He says, what's more likely, A, USC wins by 14 plus, or B, USC loses?
I think 14 plus.
I guess the way we're going on this show would be tough.
Doesn't make me feel like
but yeah, I mean they could lose too, though. That's the matchup. It doesn't really look good for Michigan, but it wouldn't be unheard of if they lost.
Certainly not unheard of. No, I'm just saying which was more likely. I think USC winning by 2 touchdowns is more likely.
I'm going to take the loses. I'll be the contrarian here, simply because to win by 14 plus, I'm just not sure there's going to be that many possessions in this game. Like, I think Michigan's going to run the ball so much, and even if they get 3.5 yards a carry every time, like that'll eventually work its way to a first down. And with the road atmosphere, I think USC is going to be pretty deliberate, and I think they'd like to hold the ball for a little bit too, and flex their muscles a little bit like that. And I do think this Michigan defense is probably better than we've given them credit for. I know they've made their mistakes, and the USC offense is really good, but this Michigan defense still is really good, especially I think in a home game like this. And I thought they played pretty well against Texas outside of on third down, so maybe they get 1 or 2 more stops on third down. That I just don't know if I see USC running away with it. And it's a home game, so I think the smart pick is to say that it's more likely USC loses than wins by 14 plus. But I don't know. I could see it going either way.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think I'm being like cautiously optimistic if you're looking from the USC point of view. I'm just not seeing an easy way for Michigan to get the win outside of crazy things happen because it's a home game. That kind of stuff. Like, how many yards is Alex Orji going to throw for?
Under 100. I think that's how Michigan wins, is if he throws for under 100 yards.
You think?
Because I think that means
you have to throw for more than that.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I guess if you're just running the ball effectively, then you don't need him to throw. But I just have a hard time picturing that. Like we talked about this a bunch. Defense travels. LSU has athletes like Michigan has athletes, or Ole Miss or Miami or whatever, and USC did a really good job there, and I just feel like it's going to be the same sort of thing. Like, can Michigan just run all over? I would be so shocked if something like that happened. All the linebackers are back. They're healthy. They're rotating guys. Like, guys aren't going to get tired. Man, I have a hard time picturing it.
Anthony on YouTube says, would you guys say Louisville in the bowl was better than Michigan this week?
I don't know. I don't know if I can
Bowls
make that
tough.
comparison. We don't know what the heck Alex Orji looks like.
Yeah.
So.
And bowl games are like, it's just really hard. Like, they had a good defense. They were a ranked team. It was a good win, but
I think Michigan's better. Right?
I think so too.
And by maybe a little, not a lot.
And it's at home.
Yeah, by a good amount. Like Louisville for a little bit, they didn't really look like they wanted to be there, I thought.
I think if the spread was like USC minus 10.5 and it was a neutral site or home game, like I'd be pretty confident in that. But just the one thing that's holding me up is the fact that it is in the big house, and I'm not really sure how USC is going to respond to that.
Yeah.
I ended up posting on Twitter this week that USC hasn't had a ranked true road game win outside of Los Angeles since 2016. They went in 2022 and they beat UCLA in the Rose Bowl. But other than that, they haven't beat a ranked team on the road outside of the general vicinity of where we're at right now. And so that's like for it to be 8 years since the program has had a win like that, I kind of want to see it before I get this confident that they're going to be able to go into maybe the toughest place in the Big Ten to win a game and actually pull it off.
They're due.
Yeah, they are. They haven't won on the. There was a tweet about the East Coast
East
or the
Coast,
time
yeah,
zone.
they're 0 for their last 11.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, most of those are just Notre Dame, like every other year, and it's Clay Helton stuff. So, like, I think you can. Some of that stuff,
they went and they played Bama in the opening game
the
in the
Bama
Central
one
Time
good.
Zone.
Yeah, that was not good.
What
are you getting? There's a couple of Facebook questions. Are they popping up or no?
I'm not seeing them. No.
I can.
You want to read them? Yeah.
I'll read them later. Do you want me to do them now or?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you what you remember about the Washington game in 2016.
It was pretty exciting. That was the year that USC, started off like terribly, and they moved Sam Darnold in there, but they ended up beating both teams that were in the Pac-12 championship game. They beat Colorado and they beat Washington.
That's frustrating.
Yeah.
Not being able to get it done against the worst teams.
Yeah. But I mean, you lose to Utah, and then they won like their last 9 games or whatever. But that was a big win up there. And Washington made the playoff that year, so it wasn't like they were a slouch. So they were playing well, but it was mostly Sam Darnold. That was it was still a poorly coached team. You just had sort of lightning in the bottle with Sam Darnold, and it just sort of made things happen. But yeah, that was a fun year. I mean, that was to start off 1-3. It was right after Pat Hayden made Clay Helton the permanent head coach, and he did this weird press conference where he just got up on the podium and just said, "We're making Clay Helton the permanent head coach," and they just beat UCLA, so they were kind of coming off a high. And they lose like 5 of their next 6 games or something like that, and it was crazy. Like they lost to Stanford, and I think the Pac-12 championship. I mean, it was Notre Dame, then Stanford, and then the next year they lost to Alabama, Utah, and they beat like Utah State or something, and then they lost another game. I think the Stanford again.
Yeah.
And it was like, you just made this guy the permanent head coach, and you just went on this horrible run. And to turn things around, I mean, that saved Helton's job for sure. But Pat Hayden got up in front of everybody and was just like made this declaration like he was, a king or something, and then walked off and wasn't going to take any questions. We had to like surround him in the hallway with cameras and everything. Bruce Feldman's asking him like, why were you doing? He just like he was just basically thought he could make this decision, and everyone would just accept. Oh, it's great. Pat Hayden said it's true, so this would be the thing. And got all these questions, and they lose all these games, and he looked really terrible. So that was sort of like the beginning of everything. It was a great year, and they ended up winning the Rose Bowl, but you kind of saw the writing on the wall. Like the next year, you win the Pac-12 and get curb stomped by Ohio State. The good teams they played, they lost to, and they lost badly, and they got pushed around. So you could see USC fans knew, unfortunately, this wasn't real. This was Sam Darnold making magic, and that's about it. And then things just kind of fell apart from there. And Lynn Swann gives him an extension. It was one of those things that just kept getting worse and worse. So a lot of that stuff was from this horrible administration, a couple of administrations that were bad coaching, and that's why you lost some of those games. You're going to win some games in those time zones now, especially with a lot more opportunities too.
All right, we got a couple more here on YouTube that are kind of just yes or no ones, and then we can move on to the Facebook questions. And if you want to call in, still no callers in the queue, but we're happy to bring you guys on. 5124-TUNNEL is the number. Kevin Morris says, do you think this game is where Shelby and/or Lucas have a multi-sack game?
Orgy's slippery. I think it's going to be tough to sack him.
There aren't going to be enough pass plays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're just trying to contain. Like, I don't think sacking is like, you're just trying to not let him take off and run.
Yeah, don't even bother.
That's a good point. Yeah, they might not even try to attack him. They might just stay in their lanes and
don't
keep
do
him in the
anything
middle.
crazy.
We want you to throw it.
Yeah, exactly. You're honestly probably better off with him throwing than having to try and scramble.
He's probably so sick of hearing how he can't throw. So
yeah, he's not a fan of the show.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody's show, I don't know. Like, we just haven't seen it. Like if you're one of the fans or whoever media talking about it, like, you've been in games and we've never seen you do it. Like, you've been in a lot of games and it hasn't happened. So, I mean, Miller Moss was in games, as a backup and threw passes and ran in touchdowns, and so I don't know. He threw a touchdown pass against Arkansas State towards the end there. We'll see, but we just haven't seen it, and there's been a lot of opportunities. It's sort of those things like, like the Princess Bride. If you guys, that's too old for you guys, you remember, but when Wesley is like standing, he's like still paralyzed, and Humperdinck is there, and he threatens him and tells him he's gonna beat him to the pain or whatever it was, and then he's like, "You're bluffing. You can't." And he's like, "Am I?" And he stands up and he holds his sword, and then Humperdinck gives up, and they tie him up, and then he collapses. Like, yeah, it was a complete bluff. Like, can he really swing that sword? Or is it just like, I'm not sure.
We'll find out.
I don't know if that's a great analogy, but it's just
the touchdowns he's thrown this year, and he's thrown 2, which is as many as Davis Warren has. I think they've gone a collective 3 yards. They're just him on the edge, and there's a tight end right in front of him. He could run it in himself, but he's like, here's the football, and they walk in for a touchdown. I mean, Ryan brought it up. He hasn't completed a pass in his collegiate career that's traveled 5 yards in the air, which is that is mind blowing.
Miller Moss has been 3 games and done 40 of those or something. So I don't know.
Yeah. Other yes or no question. Any concern about such an early game time start? And then they said, when was the last time USC played a morning game LA time? So it's 3:30 Eastern, which means it's around 12:30, not morning in LA. And I think the bye week is probably pretty helpful for that.
Yeah, this is a CBS game. It's not the big noon kickoff for Fox, so that would be a little more concerning.
I would not have had fun. That wouldn't be good. We'd have to wake up real early.
Yeah, the last early one was Colorado last year, right?
Oh, yep. that was rough because parking was terrible. Like the media stuff, we got there super early, and it still was not.
Coach Prime.
Yeah, that's going to collapse and stuff too.
Last YouTube question is, can you talk about the Michigan tight end situation? We talked about Colston Loveland, but they're asking about the second string. Marlon Klein is a guy that they're pretty excited about in that program, and Colston Loveland's like the #1 tight end in the draft, but Marlon Klein is the guy that in that tight end room everyone considers to be the most physically talented. So he had a couple nice plays against Arkansas State. If Loveland's not able to go, maybe he's a more dynamic threat in the passing game than even some of their receivers are. But then again, it's like what passing game are we talking about here?
Yeah, how's Klein as a run blocker? That's my question.
I think he's pretty good. He's strong, he's fast, but I think you'd love for him to be the second tight end at this point in your season, considering no receiver for them has more than 45 yards, I'm pretty sure, all year.
And then Hogan Hansen has a touchdown, 1 catch, 9 yards for a touchdown.
Yeah, that's the little from Alex Orji.
Yep.
Nice.
Freshman.
Facebook questions.
Facebook. So we had Cliff. Will Miller Moss pass for 300+ yards?
I'm going to say no.
No. I'm going to say a solid 265.
Yeah, I think. I think it's going to be a more reasonable number. It's probably going to be fewer possessions, so I don't think you're going to see him kind of go crazy. Mike Rust. Who do you think?
Sorry to interrupt. Ewers only had 246 yards. It's just hard to do it against Michigan.
Yeah, I think so. That makes sense.
And they've got no semblance of a run game, but their running backs are all hurt, so it's not like they were running the ball a ton over Michigan. So
yeah, they had some success, right? How did they run the ball? They did okay, or is it like
they had one guy there? A receiver, I think. Ryan Wingo a receiver? He had one carry for 55 yards, and that totally messed up their averages. Their running back, one of them averaged 3.6 yards a carry, one of them 3.8, another one 2.4. They weren't great.
Okay. Mike on Facebook. Thanks for watching on Facebook, by the way. Who do you think will be the leading receiver? This is really hard to do.
It's a crapshoot. Lake
because
McCree, maybe?
Yeah, they don't. Lake McCree might not be a bad choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're probably a little bit scared of the entire side of the field that Will Johnson's on, and I think you'd probably rather attack the linebackers than attack the Michigan DBs, which I think that's the position that has slipped up the least on the Michigan defense. They haven't tackled very well, but they're really good in pass coverage, as they have been for years.
Yeah.
I don't think Johnson would shadow Zachariah Branch, so this could be a good Zachariah Branch game.
I was thinking that too. Because maybe you are trying to dump it off a little bit, and he breaks one and stuff. I'll go with him. But I think you're going to see Lake McCree get 4 or 5 catches again. And he can be the third down guy, and it's just he just moved the chains for you and stuff. And that's been a really underrated part of how successful this offense has been. I think that when you can spread it around like that, and it's not just throwing to Marquise Lee every time and give him the Biletnikoff. You spread it around, it just makes it so much harder for a defense to stop because you just don't know. If Moss can get to his third, progression and that guy's covered, and I'm still getting rid of it quick, and I found the third guy and he's open, that's really tough to do. You can't cover everybody, So if you can just find oh, the first guy is open a lot. Well, when he's not, the second guy, we found him, and maybe he's not open. And if you can get all the way to third, fourth dudes and find dudes open and move the chains, like that's just a nice thing to have. Cliff also said, I want to know, if Michigan runs 30-plus times, will our defense be able to finish strong, or will they wear down in the heat and humidity? It's supposed to be like 80 degrees.
Yeah, 85, I think.
Wow.
Not exactly the cold, brisk Big Ten weather that the Big Ten fans were saying USC couldn't handle.
I can't predict that, but based on what happened against LSU and all the offseason conditioning and the weight gain, it seemed like USC was the stronger, tougher team at the end against LSU, and I think that'd be a good bet to be the stronger, tougher team at the end of this Michigan game, too, based on everything that they've done in the offseason. And now that we've seen it against LSU, I feel a lot better predicting it than when we hadn't seen it.
Yeah, and the bye week helps with that. You're not trying to recover this week really much at all after a game, which Michigan had to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the questions on Facebook. I'll try to find out why. Usually they pop up and we can put them on the screen, but I was just monitoring just to make sure that we had some stuff there. But so hopefully you're watching on Facebook. We got your questions. Put them on the show.
All right, we don't have any calls, so I guess we won't take calls this week. We can end it with one final question, and we were going to get to it anyway. Oscar says, what is your score prediction?
Yes.
Connor can start.
I've been going back and forth all week, so we're going with 5.5 as a spread.
That's what we're picking. I don't know. Has it moved? Is it like 5 now, or is it 6?
I think it's 6.
Yeah, I've heard some people were saying
Vegas knows about Alex Orji. They bumped it a half point.
So I guess I'll pick USC 24 to, or no, I'll go 21-14. I think it's going to be a pretty low scoring game, and I just trust this defense. That leaves out any field goals, so maybe that's a bad prediction, but I think they're going to cover the spread. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, I guess, based on where I was 3 weeks ago. So, yeah, I'll go 21-14, and we'll see. I think the USC defense, people have gotten up to speed with USC. They see that the team's pretty good. I think this week you show everyone, okay, this defense, they might be great.
All right, I'm gonna have USC covering the spread. I've drank my own Kool-Aid, everything I've talked about. I think they can still score. I think they can put 3 touchdowns on the board and a couple of field goals. I'm gonna go 30-13.
Oh,
wow. So you have
them covering triple the spread.
Blow them out.
Okay.
I was thinking about, literally, I was thinking about just I'm just going to take Michigan the points. That's safe. And if you're wrong, whatever.
Yeah,
that means USC
switched,
won.
man.
I literally was just, and I did the podcast with Champions earlier today, plug for that. And David Woods, he was like, I think Michigan's bad. I think USC's going to blow. He's like, Danton Lynn, who he covered last year for UCLA, is like, Danton Lynn against a one-dimensional offense is deadly. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. I'm like, all right, screw it. I'll just pick it. And then, might be wrong, but whatever. But I'm going to say 30-13, USC rolls them.
Yeah, I was saying to people this week, other students at school who were asking, they don't follow the team a ton, so they're like, well, what do you think? And I told them, okay, if USC gets to 21, they win. I thought that's kind of how it is. I'm not sure Michigan's scoring 3 touchdowns. So whether that was a 21-20 win, it didn't really matter to me. I just thought if they get to 21, they win. So I was leaning 21-17 for most of the week and taking Michigan to cover but lose. And then hearing everything that you guys have had to say today, I'm going to bump it up. I'm going to say 24-17, USC covers. I think that 17-point mark is where I'm at for Michigan because I do think they're going to score. I think they're still going to be able to run the ball semi-effectively. Even good rush defenses struggle over the last couple of years with Michigan's running game, and I don't think that's saying anything bad about Danton Lynn or the USC defense if they allow a couple of rushing scores or if they allow Michigan to run for maybe 4.5 yards a carry instead of 3.5 or 4 because it's Michigan. But I don't think that they're going to have a dynamic enough passing game to pass 17 points. So I think USC scores in the first quarter. Maybe they pull away a little bit. Michigan scores a touchdown. But I like 24-17. But a kind of game where it doesn't really ever feel like Michigan's a quick touchdown away from tying the game up because of the fact it'll take them so long to go down the field, I think.
Yeah, we got a couple in the Facebook chat. Guy says 31-17 USC. Cliff 28-20 USC. And Mike 24-9 USC. Wow, 9.
Field
I mean, I
goals.
could see that too. We'll see.
I think Michigan's going to kick some field goals.
Yeah. The one underrated thing, their punter was really good last year, Tommy Doman, and he's been just horrendous this year. His longest punt is 44 yards, whereas the last couple of years he's been a guy that's averaging 45 yards a punt. So
kicker's been good. The kicker's hit a bunch of so they've hit some field goals and stuff. So that's been one positive. But USC's doing that well. They're flipping the field even when they don't, So, God, it's just that's why.
It's just nice that USC has a defense that makes you earn every inch. And I think Michigan, they need to get lucky, and they need a defense to let them off the hook a little bit, and I just don't think that's this USC defense. How nice is it to say that?
It is very nice. Yeah.
It is a lot like that Utah game last year, where you didn't even feel like Utah played incredibly well offensively, but they were able to get that long run from Bryson Barnes late in the game. They got the roughing the passer to move him down the field. They got Sione Vaki manned up one-on-one with an edge rusher. There were breaks, and USC gave them stuff like that, just horrible missed tackles. That if USC could just avoid stuff like that, I think Michigan probably needs to do too much in its own regard that they won't be able to do, and I'm not sure they can score enough.
Yeah,
I'm honestly more confident in the USC defense this weekend than I am in the USC offense, which is kind of crazy to say. But
that is nuts. Yeah.
No, I think I'm there too, based on what the defense has done. Yeah,
one-dimensional, it's just set up so well. So we'll wait and see what happens.
No reverses where Woody Marks is throwing it to Zachariah
don't
Branch
do it.
in front of your own end zone. Let's avoid that.
That's what I'm saying. Just play by the book. Don't just do 1, 2, 3 ABC. Do it. Yeah.
A key player that you've got in mind, someone that you think needs to have a big game to lend into the score prediction that you guys have made?
Huge game for the linebackers, I think.
Yeah, Eric Gentry,
Mason Cobb, Easton Mascarenas, Arnold. Maybe we'll see a fourth linebacker if Michigan is running the ball as much as we think, because those three guys could get tired. Cobb and Gentry are coming off of injuries too, so that'll be something to watch. In this game, you need a lot from those guys. They were so key to stop the run against LSU. The defensive line, of course, will be huge as well, but those guys getting between those offensive linemen and the gaps the defensive line creates, that is what Danton Lynn wants them to do. They did it really well against LSU. I'm looking at the linebackers for sure.
And I think probably the tackles like Elijah Page and Mason Murphy, if they play pretty well, then I have a hard time seeing this offense not moving the ball.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, do you guys have any more thoughts before we wrap it up? Head to
let's wrap it up.
Ypsilanti tomorrow. Play some laser tag with Chris at the meetup. Yeah,
if you're going to be in Michigan, Ypsilanti, it's pronounced with an I, not a Y, and it's an upper Midwest thing. Starting 7:30 p.m. Connor and I don't land till 8, so we're going to zoom right over there. But, yeah, just a meetup at Rocco's. Looks like a really cool bar. Lots of stuff going on, like laser tag and cornhole and all kinds of crap going on there. Not crap, but there's the cool stuff. But, yeah, come meet us, and it should be a lot of fun. So just come check it out if you are going to the game. And hopefully you will. It's a historic game. And if you're a big USC fan, this is definitely a good one to go to.
And if you're flying direct, good luck with Spirit Airlines tomorrow. I hope you guys can survive the Spirit trip. Not flying direct, I have to stop in Chicago, but I'm glad I'm not flying Spirit. So
yeah, I've never flown Spirit, but it was literally the only good direct option. So I'm like, all right, we'll try it. And we were thinking we have to pay for overhead baggage and stuff. But when I bought the tickets, they were a package that included your luggage and everything. So whatever I bought was included in that. I guess if we want water and stuff, you have to pay. But
get them in the airport.
Yeah, get some stuff before you get on the plane. But yeah, cross our fingers. I think USC Psycho took Spirit and didn't really like it, but then he got some. I saw on Twitter he got some Detroit style pizza and really loved it. So he's there already. Yeah, but he survived. So we'll hopefully be there and see you guys at Rocco's.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching. If you're still here, please make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button, and tell a friend about the podcast. If they're thinking about this game and they want a preview, send it to them so that they can hear our thoughts on USC and Michigan. But for now, we're signing off, heading to Ann Arbor in a couple of days, and really excited to get in the big house and see the way that this game plays out. But for Connor Morrissette and Ryan Abraham, I'm Jack Smith. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday night, and we'll talk to you again on Sunday after the game.